One woman believed human sacrifice could protect her son from death, and in a quiet Italian town, 3 women disappeared. She made soap. Some stories are frightening because of what happened. Others are frightening because of why it happened. In Italy, during the years of war and uncertainty, a woman named Leonarda Cianciulli became consumed by the fear of losing her son. Neighbors saw an ordinary mother, religious, quiet, familiar. But behind the walls of her home, fear slowly turned into obsession, and obsession eventually turned into murder. Because this case was never only about violence, it was about superstition, sacrifice, and a woman who believed fate could be controlled. Before anyone called her a killer, Leonarda Cianciulli was simply a woman people knew. In the town of Correggio, Italy, she appeared ordinary. She spoke politely. She ran a small shop. Neighbors visited her home for advice, conversation, and tea. Some described her as caring. Others remembered her as deeply religious. Nothing about her seemed threatening. And that is part of what made the story so difficult to understand later. Because when people look back, they struggled to connect the woman they knew with the crimes that would eventually shock the country. Leonarda was born in 1894 in Montella, a small town in southern Italy. According to later accounts, her childhood was deeply unhappy. She claimed her mother never truly wanted her, and that the relationship between them was cold and painful. Some reports even suggested that Leonarda believed she had been born from a forced marriage, something she carried with her for years. Whether every detail was true or not, one thing was clear. Leonarda grew up believing that suffering followed her. As a young woman, she attempted suicide at least once. The emotional instability that would later define much of her life was already beginning to appear. But in early 20th century Italy, mental health was rarely discussed openly. People explained fear through religion, through fate, through superstition. And Leonarda believed strongly in all 3. Eventually, she married a registry clerk named Raffaele Pansardi. Her family reportedly disapproved of the marriage, and Leonarda later claimed that her mother cursed her for choosing him. It was a story that sounded dramatic to outsiders, but to Leonarda, the curse felt real. Over time, she became convinced that something dark was hanging over her life. The couple moved several times before finally settling in Correggio. There, Leonarda slowly built a reputation as a familiar face in the community. She sold household items and small products from her shop, spoke comfortably with neighbors, and often presented herself as a motherly figure. People trusted her, and trust would become one of the most important parts of this story. Because long before the investigations, before the disappearances, before anyone understood what was happening behind closed doors, Leonarda Cianciulli was known for something very different. She was known as a woman who had suffered, a woman who prayed constantly, a woman terrified of losing the people she loved. And over the years, that fear began to grow into something far more dangerous. For Leonarda, fear did not appear all at once. It grew slowly, through grief. After marrying Raphael, she tried to build the kind of life many women around her wanted at the time: a family, children, stability, and faith that the future would improve. But almost immediately, tragedy became part of that future. Leonarda became pregnant many times over the years, yet again and again, the pregnancies ended in loss. Some children died shortly after birth. Others were lost through miscarriages. Different sources give different numbers, but most agree that she suffered repeated and devastating losses before only a few of her children survived into adulthood. Each death affected her deeply, and with every loss, her belief in curses and fate became stronger. In early 20th century Italy, superstition still held enormous influence over daily life. Fortune tellers, omens, religious warnings, and signs from God were taken seriously by many people, especially during periods of uncertainty and poverty. Leonarda was already emotionally fragile, and over time, she began searching for answers anywhere she thought she could find them. At some point, she visited fortune tellers who made predictions that would stay with her for years. One reportedly told her that prison and an asylum were waiting in her future. Another warned that all of her children would die. Whether those predictions were remembered accurately later or reshaped after the crimes became public is impossible to know for certain. But what mattered was this: Leonarda believed them. And once those ideas took hold in her mind, they became impossible to separate from reality. The surviving children became the center of her world, especially her son Giuseppe. She watched over them constantly, worried about illness, worried about accidents, worried about fate taking them away the same way it had taken the others. To outsiders, she looked overprotective, but inside Leonarda's mind, something far darker was developing. She no longer saw tragedy as random. She believed there was a force moving against her family. And slowly, she began to think that survival required sacrifice. As the years passed, Italy itself also became more unstable. Economic hardship, political tension, and eventually war created fear across the country. For many people, religion became a source of comfort. For others, superstition became a way to explain suffering. For Leonarda, the line between the two began to disappear. Prayer mixed with paranoia. Faith mixed with ritual. And by the time her children reached adulthood, one thought had already rooted itself deeply inside her mind. If fate demanded a price, then somehow someone would have to pay it. By the time Leonarda Cianciulli settled in Correggio, she had already lived through years of fear, loss, and emotional instability. But in public, very little of that was visible. Correggio was a quiet town in northern Italy, the kind of place where people knew each other's routines. Shop owners recognized familiar faces. Neighbors stopped to talk in the street. News traveled quickly, but trust also formed easily between people who saw each other every day. And Leonarda understood how to become part of that world. She opened a small shop and slowly built relationships within the community. Customers came not only to buy things, but often to talk. Leonarda listened carefully to people's problems. She gave advice. She comforted others. Over time, many began to see her as dependable and kind. Some even viewed her almost like a mother figure. She was deeply religious in appearance. She spoke openly about faith, worry, and family. Nothing about her behavior suggested violence. In fact, many people later admitted the same thing after her arrest. They never suspected her. And that was exactly what made the case so disturbing. Because the image Leonarda presented to the world was calm, familiar, and ordinary. She did not isolate herself from society. She did not appear aggressive or unstable in public. She blended into everyday life so completely that people lowered their guard around her without even realizing it. Women trusted her, especially women who were lonely, struggling, or searching for opportunity. And Leonarda knew how to make people feel understood. But beneath that ordinary exterior, her fears had not disappeared. If anything, they had become stronger with time. She remained intensely protective of her children, particularly Giuseppe. Even as he grew older, she worried constantly about losing him. Then, the world around her began changing again. The late 1930s brought growing instability across Europe. Political tension increased. War no longer felt distant. Families across Italy feared what might happen next, especially mothers with sons approaching military age. For Leonarda, those fears became overwhelming, because she was no longer only afraid of fate. Now, she was afraid the world itself was coming for her son. And once that fear took control of her thoughts, the woman people trusted in Correggio slowly began moving towards something far more dangerous. As Europe moved closer to war, fear spread across Italy. Families followed political developments anxiously. Young men were expected to serve. Mothers worried constantly about letters from the military, about injuries, about death arriving without warning from somewhere far away. But for Leonarda Cianciulli, the fear became something far more intense than ordinary concern. It became obsession. By this point in her life, she already believed that tragedy followed her family. Years of loss, superstition, and emotional instability had shaped the way she saw the world. She no longer viewed suffering as random. In her mind, disasters happened for a reason. Fate demanded balance, and if that balance was ignored, people she loved would die. Nothing mattered more to her than protecting her son Giuseppe. Among all her surviving children, he became the center of her emotional world. Leonarda watched over him constantly and feared that the same force she believed had taken her other children would eventually come for him too. Then came the possibility that Giuseppe could be sent to war. To most people, it was a terrifying reality of the time. To Leonarda, it felt like a prophecy coming true. The fear consumed her completely. And somewhere during those years, her thinking crossed a line that most people could never imagine crossing. She began convincing herself that sacrifice could change destiny, that somehow, through ritual, through offerings, through acts she believed carried spiritual meaning, she could protect her son from death. The frightening part was not only what she believed, it was how normal she still appeared to everyone around her. Neighbors continued seeing the same polite woman running her small shop. Customers still spoke with her casually. People still trusted her enough to enter her home without fear. No one realized that behind the familiar conversations and ordinary routines, Leonarda's mind was moving deeper into paranoia and ritualistic thinking. And eventually, those beliefs turned into plans. Not sudden violence, not uncontrolled rage, something quieter, more deliberate. Leonarda began identifying women who were vulnerable, women searching for marriage, work, or a better future, women who trusted her enough to believe what she told them. Because in Leonarda's mind, she was no longer simply making choices. She believed she was preventing tragedy. She believed she was protecting her son. And soon, women in Correggio would begin disappearing without explanation. She believed fate wanted to take her son, and she became convinced someone else had to be sacrificed instead. The first woman Leonarda targeted was named Faustina Setti. She was a middle-aged woman from Correggio who, according to reports, had spent years searching for stability and companionship. Like many women of that period, marriage represented security, respectability, and the possibility of a different future. And Leonarda understood exactly how to use that hope. At some point, she told Faustina that she knew of a man in the town of Pola who was interested in marriage. It was a lie, but Faustina believed her. That trust was important to Leonarda. She did not force her victims into danger. She guided them there carefully, using reassurance instead of threats. To the women around her, Leonarda still appeared helpful and sincere. Before Faustina supposedly left for Poland, Leonarda instructed her to write letters to friends and relatives. The letters explained that she had arrived safely and was beginning a new life. Leonarda reportedly told her to leave the letters behind so they could be mailed later. It was a calculated detail. If anyone became concerned after Faustina disappeared, the letters would create the illusion that she had left voluntarily. On the day Faustina visited Leonarda's home for the last time, no one around them suspected anything unusual. There were no public arguments, no signs of panic, just another familiar visit between two women who knew each other. But inside the house, something horrifying happened. According to Leonarda's later confession, she killed Faustina with an axe shortly after she entered the home. Then came the detail that would make the case infamous across Italy. Leonarda claimed she dismembered the body and used caustic soda to dissolve the remains. During her confession, she described the process with a chilling level of calmness, as though she were explaining an ordinary household task rather than a murder. Some versions of the story later claim she turned parts of the remains into soap and baked goods. Over time, those details became the most sensationalized part of the case. Newspapers focused heavily on them, and the public became fascinated by the horror of the allegations. But beneath the shocking headlines was something even more disturbing. Leonarda believed what she was doing had meaning. This was not violence committed in anger, not revenge, not financial desperation alone. In her mind, the killing was connected to sacrifice, protection, fate, and after Faustina disappeared, life in Correggio continued normally. People still entered Leonarda's shop, still spoke to her politely, still trusted her, because no one yet realized that the disappearances had already begun. After Faustina Setti disappeared, there was no immediate panic in Correggio. The letters Leonarda had arranged helped create a believable explanation. Faustina had supposedly left town willingly. She was starting a new chapter of her life somewhere else. And in a period shaped by war, instability, and constant movement across Italy, disappearances did not always attract immediate suspicion. For Leonarda, that mattered, because the success of the first murder seemed to confirm something dangerous in her mind. She believed the sacrifice had worked. Her son was still safe. And once that belief settled deeper into her thinking, the line between fear and justification disappeared almost completely. The second woman Leonarda targeted was Francesca Soavi. Unlike Faustina, Francesca was reportedly searching for employment rather than marriage. Leonarda told her about a promising job opportunity in another city and offered to help arrange everything. Once again, she presented herself as supportive and trustworthy, someone trying to improve another person's life. And once again, the victim believed her. Leonarda repeated many of the same steps she had used before. Francesca was instructed to prepare letters explaining her departure and future plans. The letters would later help delay suspicion by convincing friends and relatives that she had left voluntarily. It showed how methodical Leonarda was becoming. This was no longer an impulsive act driven entirely by panic. A pattern had formed. She selected vulnerable women carefully, created believable stories for their disappearances, and used the trust she had built in the community as protection against suspicion. To the outside world, she remained calm. Inside her home, something very different was happening. According to her confession, Francesca arrived at Leonarda's house, expecting help for her future. Instead, she became Leonarda's second victim. And afterward, Leonarda described disposing of the body in almost the same manner as before. What made the case especially disturbing was not only the violence itself, but Leonarda's emotional detachment when speaking about it later. During her confession, she explained the killings with shocking precision and little visible remorse, as though the acts had become part of a routine she believed was necessary. That transformation mattered, because by this stage, Leonarda no longer seemed to view herself as someone committing evil acts. She saw herself as someone carrying out a purpose. The rituals, the preparations, the sacrifices, all of it had become connected in her mind to protecting Giuseppe from harm. And as long as her son remained alive and safe, Leonarda became more convinced that what she was doing was working. But disappearances are difficult to hide forever, especially in a town where people eventually begin noticing who never comes back. The disappearances had not yet been connected. The town still believed the women had simply left to begin new lives. But inside Leonarda's home, the pattern was already becoming routine. And soon, someone far more difficult to hide would walk through her door. Next on True Echoes. The women in Correggio were disappearing quietly, and for a long time, no one realized the stories were connected. But the next disappearance would be different, because this time, the victim was more visible, more remembered, and her absence would begin to raise questions that could no longer be ignored. As suspicion slowly moved toward Leonarda Cianciulli, the carefully constructed world she had built around secrecy and superstition started to collapse. And soon, Italy would hear a confession so disturbing that the case would become infamous around the world. Next on True Echoes, Leonarda Cianciulli, the Soap-Maker of Correggio, Part 2. Part 2, The Truth Coming Soon on True Echoes. Fear can change the way people see the world, but sometimes it changes the way they justify what they do. By the time the second woman disappeared, Leonarda Cianciulli no longer believed she was simply committing crimes. In her mind, she was protecting her son from a fate she thought was waiting for him. And that belief was about to lead her even further into darkness. What do you think about this case? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm listening. Every voice matters. Subscribe and step into the echoes of truth. To be continued.